Hi, I'm Miss Hall.
Hi, I'm Miss. Hi, I'm Miss Isaac.
And this is lesson 55, adding and subtracting rational expressions with like denominators.
Oh my God.
Okay, so example 1 is adding and subtracting with like denominators. This is the exact same as you learned when you learned fractions. When you add, you need to make sure you have a common denominator. And then you simply add the numerators and the denominator stays the same. Same with subtraction. You must have a common denominator. Okay, so now we'll apply this to rational expressions. We have a common denominator, so I just bring that over. Doesn't change. And then I add the numerators. 7 plus 3 is 10. Now I always have to check, can it be simplified? And it can. I can divide both the numerator and denominator by 2. Right, they have a common factor of 2. And I'm left with 5 over 2x. Example B, we're subtracting with like denominators. Enjoy this while it lasts. Like denominators are pretty straightforward as long as you remember to keep the denominator the same. X plus 6. And then you subtract 2x minus 5. Is there a GCF in the numerator? No. So I am done. Okay, now we're going to start to think about what does it mean to be adding or subtracting with unlike denominators? Because you need a common denominator when you add or subtract fractions. So we have an example of addition where you have C and D as the denominators. And you could just make a common denominator of CD. Same thing with subtraction. Now, that's one way to find a common denominator, and I want to use an example here. If we were asked to find, say, 3/4 plus 7/10, right? We could find a common denominator by multiplying the denominators. In this case, they would both be 40. Now label this as CD. That's a common denominator, but it's not the least common denominator. The least common denominator for 4 and 10 is 20. That is the least common denominator. And when we get to adding and subtracting rational expressions where there are polynomials in the denominator, this common denominator method will get us the right answer, but it will create a lot more work in terms. So we want to get good at identifying the least common denominator. It's going to simplify the process. And so what we're going to do is we're going to practice simply finding the least common denominator, which is known as the least common multiple. Okay. So to find the least common multiple of 2 or more expressions, factor the expressions completely. The least common multiple is the product of the highest power of each factor that appears in any of the expressions. So we want to find the least common multiple of 4x squared minus 16 and 6x squared minus 24x plus 24. So you can imagine these as like the denominators. We're just going to practice finding the least common denominator, not the common denominator, the least common. So let's completely factor these polynomials. I'm going to take out a GCF of 4 and get x squared minus 4. Then I have a difference of squares. So 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. And finally, I'm going to split apart the 4 into its prime factors. So that is 2 times 2, x plus 2 times x minus 2. So I've completely factored that first polynomial, and now I'm going to completely factor the second, the quadratic trinomial. I'm going to take out 6, the GCF of 6. So I'll get x squared minus 4x plus 4. Then I can factor that trinomial, x minus 2x minus 2. And I'm going to get the prime factors of 6. So 3 times 2 times x minus 2 times x minus 2. Okay, so first step, I've completely factored both expressions. Now I'm going to look for any common factors. And I'll see that they both have a 2. So I'm going to take 1, 2. They both have an x minus 2, x minus 2. And there is nothing else common. So I bring down everything else now. So I'm going to bring down this 2, bring down the 3, and I'll bring down x plus 2 and x minus 2. And finally, I'll condense this a bit. I'll multiply 3 times 2 times 2, and I'll get 12. You'll see that we have one x plus 2 factor, so I'll keep it as x plus 2. And then we have 2x minus 2, so it's going to be x minus 2 squared. And that is the least common multiple of these two terms. So we're going to be practicing this more during class, and this is going to come in helpful in the next lesson when we have to add and subtract with unlike denominators. Knowing this information, we'll be able to find the least common denominator and not simply the common denominator.